Welcome. You have entered the zone of high strangeness, a place where the unbelievable is believed until proven otherwise. This is Gary Willer, your host. As you notice, there was no theme song tonight because I want to use most of the time available to me to play a few audios I have for you. But as always, callers are welcome. The number here is 207-593-0013. Especially interested in callers who have had some sort of paranormal experience themselves, especially around UFOs or ET encounters, or if they know of somebody who has, and you can tell their story. Best to use just first names, or you can be anonymous if you choose. I would like to thank my sponsors as well, Diverse Landscapes here in Rockland, and Eric Best, who's an author, a business consultant, and a good friend. Also, I want to send kudos out to Penn Bay Hospital. It just so happens that earlier last week, right after the show, actually, I had a recurrence of a congestive heart failure and found myself in the ICU for most of the week. And as you see, I'm here now, and this is the credit to the staff at Penn Bay Hospital. The doctors were marvelous, and a special kudos to the nurses. They're on the front line, and every one of them was not only competent, but gracious and friendly, and just made you feel good. And as you all know, there's no way to get well if you're in a stressed environment. And I found the whole experience basically stressless. So, Penn Bay, thank you. Okay, what I'm going to do tonight is that I want to play 3 short audios from Stephen GREER. These are clips actually taken from interviews he was having with different people. It's basically they're basically about the actual nature of ETs. The first one is going to be around the different kinds of life forms of the ETs that are here on Earth. The second one is going to be other beings and why are they here. And the third one will be the enigma of crop circles. As most of you know, if you've been a listener here, Stephen GREER is probably my favorite ufologist, mainly because he not only has had experience in childhood with encounters with ET beings, but he has also set up an organization called CSETI, it's CSETI.org, in which he takes people on seminars and retreats into different parts around the United States and literally makes contact with the ETs and the various flying saucers. So, I mean, he's a man that is not only intelligent, but he puts himself out there and probably is one of the best spokesmen for the whole field of ufology. Just to give ourselves a little advertisement here, this is WRFR, 93.3 FM Rockland, and 99.3 Camden, streaming and podcasts at WRFR.org. And again, a reminder that the drive is still going on to raise funds to move the station from Gay Street over to Lincoln Street Center. We're getting closer, but we still need to raise about $2,000 ourselves, and that would be put into a matching fund, so it would amount to $4,000. So any kind of money you can donate to us would be appreciated, and realize when you do donate it, the amount is being doubled. So again, hopefully some of you can still contribute, and thanks to all those who already have contributed. And we'll get there sooner, hopefully, rather than later, hopefully. Okay, I'm going to begin these tapes now, and the first one, as I said, is Stephen GREER, and it's about the different ET life forms that he knows that exist on Earth. Okay, here we go.
When is this whole question of different kinds of ET life forms, and many people will ask, well, gee, are they all humanoid? And they don't really use that term properly. So I want to do some definitions first. The ET life forms that our contact groups have experienced and seen, and as you're going to hear about, photographed, are all humanoid in the sense that they are 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, and a torso, and are upright. And this seems to be a morphogenic field, as Rupert Sheldrake would call it, where apparently the universal concept of man, and by man I don't mean the gender male, but man as in a universal symbol, the kind of symbol that Leonardo da Vinci put inside a circle that showed man, that is like a 5-pointed star. If you look at a 5-pointed star, you got a head on top, 2 arms, 2 legs, and that's considered the most sacred universal symbol, by the way, is the 5-pointed star for that reason. And I think that this is a universal morphogenic field that works, and once, according to the Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic field theory, is that because the whole cosmos is awake, and because the whole universe is a conscious quantum hologram where the fullness of intelligence is present at every point in space and time, that when a certain pattern begins to evolve and work, it then gets replicated at remote places without any linear contact. It's sort of like the 100th monkey phenomenon, where an island with a group of monkeys learn a new social skill or hunting skill or what have you, and they will find that at the same time a group of monkeys on another island that had no direct contact begin doing the same thing, that there's this sort of collective great conscious integrating switchboard in existence that integrates everything happening, and that when something works, it replicates and is used at remote places. And it seems that higher intelligent life forms, rather than being, like a circular jellyfish or what have you, tend to be these humanoid in shape. Now, what's interesting is that what we've experienced, and I have also heard this from people who've worked in classified projects that have been present at the retrieval of extraterrestrial bodies when we have unfortunately shot down using electromagnetic weapons some of these spacecraft, that the bodies that are retrieved may be very small or very tall, or various skin colors or even types of skin and various facial structures and hairless or with hair, but that they all are humanoid. They have a head, 2 arms, 2 legs. So when I say humanoid, I don't mean human-like. I mean that morphology, that shape. So I want to get that definition out there, because many times people will say, well, was the ET humanoid? And they mean looking just like a human, and that is not what humanoid means. So, definitional requirements are very important, so we know we're speaking the same language. So when I say humanoid, I just mean a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso. Now, within that, there's enormous variation. One of the Disclosure Project witnesses back in the 90s had told me that they had learned that there were several dozen different planetary species that over the years had been cataloged in classified projects that dealt with retrieval of extraterrestrial vehicles and in studying this issue. And of course, in the pop culture, everyone thinks of the big bug-eyed greys or the reptilians, which of course ironically are the ones that are man-made program life forms that are genetically created creatures, and many people that have worked in those projects have come forward to describe to us exactly how that's done. So the irony is that the public perception of ET is actually the disinformation man-made image, and the actual ETs that have been retrieved aren't very much like that, although there are a couple species that might roughly fit into the shape and size of what might be called quote-unquote a gray or what have you, but that they are more than just that. There's a whole range of beings, and some of them obviously have descended from different types of creatures to begin with. For example, and this is where this conversation gets very interesting from a anthropological point of view, and then trying to extrapolate that to what we know from extraterrestrial studies, both with what we've done and also in classified projects with some 550 military and intelligence and corporate people that I have spoken with and interviewed over the years. And what I have found is that while there's no doubt that humans, now I'm not saying humanoids, but Homo sapiens, humans, have descended from, or certainly have a genetic shared root with primates. We have 98 or 98.5, depending on who you read, percent. So some 98% of our genetic code is identical to a chimpanzee or a gorilla. Now, that's a lot, but still, that 2% is also a lot. And that is the big question of how did the 2% come about? Was it all purely evolutional, or was there also some intervention? I think it's both. And secondly, what does it mean that Homo sapiens have descended from primates? And I think that the primate studies that are being done around the world, pioneered by people like Jane Goodall and others, but more recent studies that have been done are very interesting, because what's being found, although some people don't like hearing this because they always have this idea of, quote-unquote, the noble savage, is that the many primate species organize not only into tribes, but engage in intertribal violence. And in fact, it has been recorded that chimpanzees and others have organized into warfare. Now, it's been pointed out that may be due to the stress of a shrinking habitat and things that are being imposed upon their environment by humans. But nevertheless, the question becomes that the facts are what they are, and that is that primates are noted to kill each other. Now, what's also interesting when you look at that, because this is the bane of human existence, is prejudice and fear of people who are different from us, and of course various forms of racism and misogyny and bigotry and separation and what have you, that has led to organized warfare around various differentiating qualities, whether it be skin color or religion or ethnicity or what have you. But that there is a root for that within humanity that has to be transcended, that is probably carried over from our connection to our very roots, as 98% being identical with primates. And this, of course, is always the big question of our overcoming some of the aspects of humans that are within all of us, and that we have to overcome and control and find ways to resolve that are nonviolent and doesn't result in massive warfare now that we're in the era of weapons of mass destruction. So this is a very, very interesting discussion, and there have been, of course, many books written on this issue. Now, if you look at this, though, in terms of other phyla of animals, let's take, for example, canines. Well, dogs, for example, and wolves. Now, it's interesting because years ago when I was in college, I read a very interesting book about wolves and how maligned they were. And, of course, many people say, oh, my God, that person's like a wolf and this and that. But in reality, wolves don't kill each other. They may have a pecking order with an alpha wolf and a omega wolf and a beta wolf, and they may attack an intruding wolf just to teach it a lesson. But actually they don't go to the point of killing each other, whereas the dove of peace, will peck each other to death. So what's interesting is that even within the human sort of prejudice of other species, there is this tendency to assume that wolves are violent and doves are not, when in reality doves have been known to be so territorial as to kill each other, their own kind, whereas wolves do not do so. So should it be the wolf of peace instead of the dove of peace? It's very interesting. Now, I throw out these issues not just because I tend to be a bit of a contrarian in terms of what conventional wisdom in society is saying, but also to bring up this question of what does it mean that there are civilizations from other planetary systems, I have been informed, that have evolved from a lineage for which there's no concept of violence amongst themselves and or the concept of warfare? Very interesting question.
You know, one thing that I'd like to interject here is that people might be thinking, well, wolves do kill prey, so do cetaceans kill their prey, and sometimes they even act together in groups or packs to attack their prey, but that's a whole different thing. That is not warfare, that's eating, and they happen to be predators, and that's their food.
Right, it is a very
different deal.
Every living animal eats something, even if it's a plant. And of course, they found that plants have a certain consciousness about them. Although I think it's certainly more grievous to kill a higher intelligent animal than a carrot. Nevertheless, the question is, your point is exactly correct. That many animals will organize into hunting packs to feed themselves, to survive, but it isn't done for the sake of killing. It's to survive. And as opposed to territorialism, where there's murder or organized warfare within the species, which humans do. And also, quite interestingly, it's now being established that primates do. Even if there are environmental stressors that have led to that, that's beside the point. They still engage in that. Whereas you don't see that. I mean, you don't see dolphins killing each other. You don't see many other species doing this. And so we know that this is part of the real challenge of humanity, is to transcend into a higher state of spiritual awareness, to control those proclivities so we don't engage in not only murder of people, which as an emergency doctor I used to see with great frequency in the ER. Under the most ridiculous circumstances, people would come in having been murdered or severely attacked and then subsequently die for the most trivial reasons. But also you see nation-states and city-states and tribes going back many thousands of years organizing into organized murder, which is, of course, warfare. And I think that we have to understand that there are civilizations that exist that are interstellar, that have evolved from lineages that don't have that concept at all, in the least. Now, of course, everyone gets trapped into Star Trek and Star Wars and whatever the movie du jour is, where it's one rampaging Klingon after another fighting each other. But that's much more of an anthropocentric projection, where we're projecting our own baggage, as it were, into space, than the apparent order that's out there. And I think that we have to take a look in the mirror. In fact, I think that it's very interesting that a lot of the way people will assume that our interstellar extraterrestrial visitors are violent is much more of a statement about ourselves. And it's basically the way people regard this entire subject. I think it's a giant, not only a Rorschach test, but a big mirror that reflects more about what the person is about than what is actually being intended. Because obviously, if you go through an analysis of this, any civilization capable of going faster than the speed of light, dematerializing at one point in space and rematerializing light years or galaxies away at another place like Earth, their technologies are so advanced that if they were inclined to weaponize them and be hostile towards, say, a planet like ours that's beginning to go into space with weapons and has killed almost 200 million of our own people in organized warfare in the last 100 years alone, that doesn't count the murders, the individual murders that have happened, that such species who have that capability, if they were truly hostile, would have used that proclivity with that technology, and we wouldn't be breathing the free air of Earth today, 60 years after the dawn of the nuclear era. So I think that one of the interesting things, though, is to consider the fact that in our Sea City expeditions and also in interviews I have done with classified military personnel who have dealt with retrieved extraterrestrial vehicles and bodies is that some of these species appear to have descended from, for example, what we would call bird-like creatures that become, instead of flying, are two-legged, two-arm, and a head, but are kind of feathery. Others have encountered ones that appear to have a cetacean sort of quality to them, or a dolphin-like quality. Others have encountered some that appear to be almost like a two-arm, two-leg, and a head praying mantis type intelligent life form that are apparently incredibly intelligent and very gentle, but to someone who would have insect phobia would be kind of freaked out, and et cetera and so on. And so I think that there is the possibility that almost any phyla and any type of animal, in our case, of course, it was primates and what have you, could evolve and have perhaps some augmentation of their development through some sort of mysterious intervention that would lead to an upright man or humanoid that would be from that lineage. That, in other words, we have a primate connection. Others could have a canine connection, or a cetacean connection, or a bird-like pathway, or some other pathway. Of course, it doesn't exist on this planet, but that is a type of animal life or life form that would evolve on other planets. And with that would bring their own qualities and attributes. And I think that any of them, of course, one could make the argument, might have some of the same problems humans have controlling their tendency towards violence, but the likelihood of them traveling interstellar with the level of technology that implies, which we'll get to in a moment, and remaining in a state of unchecked proclivities. In other words, there's one thing to have a capacity for violence, but if it's unchecked to the point of aggression and hostility, it's almost inconceivable that a life form would be able to not have blown itself up or encountered other life forms and blown themselves up long before they would get out of their own solar system, because there appears to be very much a cosmic order and a universal order where evolving planets are observed as Earth is being observed. And, there's a certain litmus test, a certain development in social consciousness and spiritual consciousness that's required before you're let out of your planet very far. I mean, obviously, we did go to the moon, contrary to some conspiracy theorists. It was the footage was hoax, but we, in fact, did go to the moon. But it isn't as if we're allowed to fly amongst the stars willy-nilly while we're still in the process of engaging in warfare on this planet as humans. And so I have called this the cosmic quarantine that appears to exist around any planet that has not yet become peaceful. And I have this on very good intelligence from people who have worked in the National Reconnaissance Office and the Defense Intelligence Agency, who have told me of our attempts to use some very esoteric things that fly, the man-made UFOs, as it were, the alien reproduction vehicles, to go out into space where we have been not only tracked but at times turned away. And I'll never forget a meeting I had with an analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency who back, I believe in the 70s, was analyzing various photographs that were from satellites. And some of these photographs had pictures of ET spacecraft in them between where the satellite was in space and the Earth. But he also discovered that some of the satellites were turned away from Earth. We're not looking at the Soviet Union or China or someplace, but they were looking out into space. And he asked, what are these satellites imaging, looking away from the planet? And he was told they were looking for extraterrestrial vehicles, and that some of these had become developed enough that they were targeting and tracking and targeting ET craft in a certain sector of space, and that whenever they would try to do that, those satellite systems would be jammed and switched off or disabled by the ETs. And this was causing some consternation and aggravation within these sort of classified projects. I've heard this from more than one person, so I have high confidence that those sort of things have happened. And it isn't that the ETs were hostile, but they were not going to allow us to weaponize space to such an extent that this could really get out of control. And so I think this has created a great deal of tension, by the way, because we have managed the relationship between humans and these extraterrestrial civilizations very poorly, because it's all been through the lens of a sort of military defense posture rather than understanding why they might be here, and that perhaps the concern that exists in the cosmos is that humans have gone from horse and buggies and rifles in the last 100 years or so to space travel and hydrogen bombs and even more esoteric weapons in classified projects that are electromagnetic in nature and so-called scalar or longitudinal weapons. So I think that we really have to look at this, and this is why we really do need to form a council of wise elders on this planet to be involved in this whole question of interplanetary relations and looking at it in a much broader way than sort of a knee-jerk reactionary military response. Understanding that we do have these proclivities, and that obviously if civilizations had the capacity to travel faster than the speed of light from one star system to this star system and to Earth, the likelihood that they would be hostile towards humanity and Earth, given the fact that we've been targeting them, we have downed dozens of these spacecraft, we have gone into space illegally within the classified world with weapons, et cetera, and so on, that, you know, if they had an intent that was hostile, it would have been point, set, match, and done with about 1945 when we detonated the first atomic weapon at the Trinity site, so in New Mexico. And I think this is why people need to think about this in a very broad view, is that while you can't prove a negative, many people say, well, can you prove that they're not? I said, well, you can never prove a negative, it's axiomatic, but what we can establish is that the Earth has not been attacked and invaded by these civilizations. On the other hand, we can prove that we have attacked them. So there is certainly a higher level of restraint and consciousness operating there, because with the technologies that they have at their disposal, if they wanted to kick the living daylights out of us, they could have done so and have not. And I think this is not only one of the surest proofs that that we're dealing with very developed societies that are in a higher level of social and spiritual awareness than we've yet attained collectively on Earth, but that we need to have people analyzing this whole situation with calmer minds than have been allowed to, because the people who have been allowed into the very small tent of these classified projects has been a self-selecting group of militarists and frankly, warmongers. And I think this is something we really need to correct.
Okay, you can see why Stephen is so well regarded in the UFO community. His breadth of knowledge and his ability to interpret the differences that are taking place between the ETs and ourselves, and how we are connected in many ways. And, you know, you got to love that term that we're under cosmic quarantine. I really like that. And we certainly are deserving of that kind of quarantine, I would say. Okay, I'm going to quickly move on to the next interview piece, which is about different ET life forms. Again, this is these are about the other beings and why are they here. This is another clip from an interview. Okay, I will bring that on now.
These beings are very eager to find humans who are enlightened enough to approach them peacefully, because what our covert classified military projects have been doing is to try to track these objects and shoot them down. I mean, their whole game is cat and mouse, where they're trying to destroy them. So,
was that what Star Wars was really about? I mean,
yes.
the satellites and all during the Reagan administration?
Yes, and of course, and I have been, if people go to disclosureproject.org, they'll see that we have testimony from over 100 top-secret military and intelligence witnesses who've dealt with this issue, and a number of them describe our attempts to down and to attack these objects. It's a very dangerous and foolish thing that we're doing, and it's threatening the equilibrium of the world, quite frankly, because...
So why do you think they're coming?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I think they've been here around for many thousands of years. I seriously doubt it's a recent phenomenon. I think that if you look at this, and in talking to people in British intelligence and the people in the United States military, the real increase in these events happened around the time we started detonating nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I get that.
And at the same time we started going out into space. I mean, I think you have to understand that any civilization that has reached a point of peaceful coexistence, who would see us evolving out of the time of World War II into this post-World War II period where we began to go into space, but at the same time began to develop hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons. I think this would put a big red flag over this planet, and my understanding is that they're quite concerned about what we're doing to this planet, and that also that we not be turned loose on the universe, where we could be a threat to other planets that are existing peacefully and do not even have the concept of warfare and weapon systems. And so,
because it's not just about this planet, right? I mean, it's about what happens on this planet affects the totality of reality.
Of course, in every thought and conscious action, but when there are mega system events that happen on a planet like this, it certainly affects other worlds, and it affects the equilibrium of the cosmos in general. So there's a serious reason for their being here. I think, number one, they're observing what we're doing and watching us make this big transition from a fractured, sort of warring world to a peaceful civilization, and we are going to make that transition. It may not all be smooth, but we'll make it. And I think, meanwhile, they're wanting to be sure that we don't become a threat elsewhere. And I think they're also wanting to start to open up contact with people who are peaceful and enlightened enough to understand how to make contact and why they should be making contact. And one of the things I point out to people is that a lot of folks will say, well, you know, what if some of them are hostile? I said, well, the only ones that are hostile are the ones that are being manufactured by humans. And the big mythology in the New Age world is that there are the good ones and the bad ones, and in reality, most of that is disinformation created by the intelligence community to scare people, because eventually they would like to have us put all these weapons in space and spend trillions of dollars on Star Wars type stuff. And this is exactly we've already done it. But I have folks who worked on these in the 1960s, where we already had weapon systems that were based in space that were targeting these extraterrestrial vehicles. So this has been going on for 40 years.
There's not just one race that's visiting us, though, right? I mean, do you get that?
Oh, there are dozens.
Yeah.
And none of them are hostile, and none of them are harmful. And some of them are quite worried about our hostility and have done things to try to contain us. And I think that containment, like a quarantine type of exercise, has enraged some in our classified military projects, and they don't understand why these beings would not want us, for example, to be traveling with our experimental anti-gravity vehicles, which we have, all the way out to Mars or all the way out to some of the other planets. And the reason they don't want us out there is because we're not going out there with the right intention. So the core to making contact with these beings, and the key to humans as a species being welcome in space, is establishing universal peace. World peace won't cut it. It's not going to be enough just that we have peace on Earth. We also have to have universal peace, which is what we're telling people, is that it has to evolve into an understanding that peace has to occur not just on Earth, but our whole attitude towards the cosmos has to become peaceful, or we're not going to be allowed to fulfill our potential to become ourselves interstellar beings.
Boy, Stephen, we have a lot in common. This is awesome. Well, you know what I find fascinating is that there are so many instances where the military has fired on the ships. I mean, even going down to Mexico and interfering with things that were going on down there, our government. And I don't know of any instance where any of the ships have fired back or done anything destructive.
No, it has never happened. And, if you go to a UFO conference, quote unquote, you'll find that at 90 to 95% of everything being shared there is some type of concocted disinformation designed to scare the bejeebies out of people.
Yeah.
Because, just like 9/11, the way that you control the masses is through fear, which is the opposite of love and the opposite of peace. And I think that this psychological warfare technique has been used for since the beginning of time for demagogues to control the masses. And yet, when our team has gone out all over the world, you have to understand, we have had an advanced diplomatic team that has gone all over the world to areas where these ET beings are being seen. We've made contact. We've had nothing but the most beautiful and peaceful encounters. All these stories of mutilation and abductions and torture and sexual rape and all this negative, horrible stuff, that's all disinformation or counterintelligence activities. Now, there are people in the classified programs that are human that stage those events for their psychological warfare purposes. I have a document from 1953 where the CIA stated that one of the key values of the UFO issue would be in their psychological warfare value. And it's a very interesting document. And I have another document. People need to get this book called Disclosure that have all these government documents that we have acquired and the testimony of all these military and intelligence witnesses, because they describe clearly what is really going on behind the scenes and why the media is deceived and why the public is deceived on this issue. And one of the deceptions is to try to present this idea that there's some kind of hostile threat from outer space, because they're trying to lay the foundation for future war in space. And this is what we have to resist. We have to resist this siren song of greed coming from the military-industrial complex and the sort of orthodox eschatologists, the people who would like to figure out how to precipitate an end-of-the-world scenario like these books Left Behind and all this sort of fundamentalism. Those are the guys running this program.
Yeah.
These classified programs are filled with really kooky people from the lunatic fringe of the religious extremists. And so people have to understand that this is the opposite of where our civilization is really headed, and these are the dying gasps of a dying world order.
There was something that I read in your book that kind of stunned me, and although it didn't surprise me, it was just, and that is that there are certain abduction programs that are being funded by people on the Earth.
Oh, yeah. Well, these are, if it's an abduction, it's human. If it's contact, it's ET. I tell people this is all linguistic, perhaps, but there are lots of people who've had ET contact, and there are lots of people who've been victims of these abductions, which are run by humans. For example, I have personally interviewed several military men, one of whom was an Army Ranger, who worked on special projects that were compartmented.
We have a call coming in. I'll answer that now. Hello, you're on WRFR.
Gary?
Yes?
This is Victoria.
Well, hi, Victoria. How are you?
I'm well, and yourself?
I'm getting better.
That's good. I thought I'd call to remind everyone that there's a wonderful meteor shower tonight.
Oh, great. Do you know in what direction or when?
No, in the sky.
Oh, in the sky, like north, east, southwest?
I'm not sure. I guess everyone will have to Google it, but it's supposed to be spectacular.
Is it where you are? Is it clear?
Yes, it is.
Well, okay, that's great. Well, thank you for informing us.
Well, it was good talking to you.
And I expect to hear you again sometime, calling as always.
You will.
You are one of my favorites, you know.
Well, you're one of mine.
All right, thank you, Victoria.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, I'm going to go back to the tape now.
Where they were using what are called alien reproduction vehicles. And these are things that look like a flying saucer or UFO that's made by Lockheed and Northrop. And they had either costumes on or used what are called PLFs, program life forms, that look like extraterrestrial beings, but they're not. They're completely man-made, to abduct or frighten people so that there would begin to be this subculture awareness of fear, and so that they can eventually ramp that up in sort of a cosmic Gulf of Tonkin scenario to stampede military and political leaders and the masses into accepting the cost of building weapons in space and getting into an interplanetary war. It's a matter of public record that General Douglas MacArthur, in his last speech to Congress, stated that, quote, World War III will be interplanetary war. So this has been in the planning stages since at least the 60s and perhaps the 50s. And so much of the imaging and so much of the subculture awareness on this is being driven by a virulent, well-funded, and high-tech human technological disinformation campaign that's designed to scare people. And what I tell people is that you've got to be able to look through this, it's like the movie The Matrix, this sort of matrix of deception and nonsense, and see what's really true. Because people, unfortunately, because of our sort of primitive brains, have this flight or fight response and tend to believe a threat because we're trained in our tribal roots to be paranoid of the unknown.
Right.
It's the roots of racism. It's the roots of hatred. And I think that this is something we have to resist, because there are people who are deliberately throwing fuel on that fire in a very deceptive way. And what I've tried to explain in this new book is that I have gone into meetings with folks who are in charge of those deceptive programs and have actually acquired documents from institutes that are planning this, quote, I'm using the term used in this top secret document, stagecraft, to simulate these sort of frightening experiences. So I tell people, don't be afraid of the extraterrestrial visitors, but you should be very concerned about these other agendas, and we have to be the counterbalance to that. See, we're the children of Earth, and we alone can transform this planet and prepare it for a time of universal peace.
But people that are contactees do go onto the ships, and sometimes I know do get certain markings on their bodies or other things. And when I read that, where I went was into confusion about, okay, what's what? That's kind of where it took me. You know, okay, if you're a contactee, you pretty well know you are for the most part. But then you get in, then, you know, you start finding that you have marks on your body or different things, which I've talked about on the show before. It's a subject that I'm very interested in. And I was just a little confused about the difference there and what you were talking about.
Well, I think there are people who have had actual contact with ETs that then have one of these paramilitary groups engage them in a pseudo contact event that's an abduction, and so that's deliberately confusing. Okay. And I think that you have to take every case on its own merits. I know when they have tried to target people in my group with that kind of experience, because we have this information, we have documents and insider whistleblower testimony about the technologies they're using to do this. We're able to discern between the false contact disinformation events, abductions, and the real contact events. But, you know, this is where knowledge really is power. Without the knowledge that there's the real thing versus this Memorex pseudo thing, you're not going to be able to distinguish it. And unfortunately, I think many people can't imagine that the human capabilities have evolved to where they have. And I point out to people that many of the capabilities that I'm describing existed by the 1950s. We're unlimited in scope of consciousness and what we're able to do with it. No, I'm talking about classified projects that have have weapon systems and things that look like UFOs that aren't. And but then there's so many people that have abduction type descriptions, and yet no real memories. They think it was a dream, or they wake up with marks and they don't know where they're coming from. And that's why I got confused about what you were talking about. I just wanted to clarify it for me as much as everybody else. Well, you have to take each case on its merits, and you're not going to know is it real or is it Memorex without doing a very careful investigation. The problem is that if you go to people who deal with this issue, they don't know that there's a parallel human deception program that's extremely high-tech, and they're going to confuse the real contact with the false stuff. Why? Because they don't know the false is even possible. And I remember talking to someone who did research on this once, and when I started talking about the EG&G, which is a big high-tech electronics company that was making the implants, the involvement of E-Systems and Raytheon, the fact that Northrop and SAIC and Lockheed were building things that look absolutely like an ET craft, but they're man-made, the whole concept of stagecraft. They didn't know this whole body of evidence. And I'm going, well, you better learn about it because you're not going to be able to discern. It's like a doctor not knowing the difference between chest pain from a heart attack and chest pain from a pneumonia that's eaten into the lining of the lungs or something. So, you've got to have a differential diagnosis, and knowledge is the greatest purifier, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's very, very true. Unfortunately, most of what is out there that passes for information on this subject, which is consumed in books and videos and TV shows and what have you, is deliberate false information or disinformation designed for a certain psychological conditioning response, primarily to condition people to be afraid. And what I've said to people is, well, let's put all that aside and let's actually go out to these places and make contact with a group of people who understand the technology of contact. And we go out not only with these consciousness technologies we're using, but also with laser systems and electromagnetic sounds that we send up and all these things. And we, and see what happens and let's see if there's anything to be afraid of. And there's not. I mean, the only time we've ever had anything remotely frightening is when we've been, chased by police or had, military helicopter or aircraft come down and put searchlights on us and things like this. But nothing from the ETs has been at all worrisome. It's all been humans. So I tell people that a lot of, in a sense, this is sort of a cosmic Rorschach test. It's a sort of a cosmic mirror. The way people view this is a reflection of their own inner state of knowledge and consciousness.
Okay, I'm going to end that particular piece there. I think it's fascinating how he conceded the differences between how there can be kind of false flag interactions with the extraterrestrials versus the real deal. And, when you have these kinds of experiences with these other beings, it's not as though, you're going to sit down and have a cup of coffee with them, although that could be possible, because I think some of them have very human forms and do walk among us. But in general, when they approach you or want to communicate with you, it can almost be interpreted as a dreamlike state. You're in a kind of consciousness that is not the same as how we sense the 3D world. It goes beyond that. But it's not a dream, and you know that what is happening to you is extremely unusual. But when the experience is over, and if you do have memory of it, it's very difficult to put it into your perceptual ability to say this really happened, because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit into what we know as any kind of reality. And often we tend to pass off the experience as not important, but as I've noted and others who have had such experiences, you can't just push it away. It won't go away. It stays with you as a very kind of deep sensing of something much greater and much broader than any other kind of experience. And it's often life-changing, although some people are so traumatized by this kind of interaction that they have difficulty just functioning in their everyday life. I think that's in part why I talk about embracing the mystery, because if you can embrace it without trying to define it and to control it, then you're not so afraid of it, and you allow it to occur. Okay, there's not going to be time for the third audio, which was on crop circles. I'll probably save that for next week, and say that I'm going to sign off in a few minutes, and that you can communicate with me by email if you go to GWNews2, it's a number 2, at yahoo.com. And also I have a Facebook page which is totally dedicated to the UFO phenomenon, and that address is GWNews2 as well. And on that page you'll find all sorts of different videos as well as definitive information about the radio show. And for the rest of the show, just a few minutes here, I'm going to play the healing tape by the Dalai Lama, so we can just all kind of relax and fade into a good space inside ourselves. And again, as I always say, embrace the mystery, and especially embrace the mystery that is you. Good night.
Oh